I look at myself more as a reformed self-defense instructor. I don't teach necessarily what we think of as self-defense. I do teach physical skills, but my focus is on particularly women and how we occupy and claim space. And there's a missing in self-defense, which is you're sitting there on the train, minding your own business. And then in self-defense, what I learned is how to like punch somebody and yell no. And that's a great skill. And I think that we should definitely be practicing that. But there's a gap in between of me sitting quietly, minding my own business on the train and then punching and yelling somebody. Like, what do I do in that interim time? So there's the pieces of awareness, understanding red flags, and where the improv piece comes in is exactly what you were saying, Master Olds. There is like no way that you can come up with every scenario. And if you read my blog, I walk down the street and have all kinds of adventures living here in Los Angeles. And never in any of those times was I ever rehearsed one of those in a class, or did I even think of it on my own? Like, it just happened.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from the Hearth. Today, we are joined by Miss Beverly Baker from Asphalt Anthropology out in Los Angeles, California. Miss Baker, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Miss Baker, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Heard a lot of great things about you from Jesse. And I hear you're a good friend of Jason Brick, who was on our show just a little while ago, and this great book. And apparently you've made some contributions to that. So big honor to have you. Can you tell us a little bit how you got started in the martial arts and what kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. It has been a journey, let me tell you. I started, this would have been the late 80s. I was in high school and I got into Taekwondo. Prior to that, I had done all kinds of sports. I ran track, did softball, played field hockey, originally from the Northeast, where field hockey and lacrosse were more of a thing. And so always was into something like that, loved it. And then in my junior year in high school, stumbled into a martial arts class, loved it. I still love other sports, but like I never went back, right? It was just like martial arts were my path. So I did that for about 2 years, Taekwondo about 2 years in high school. And then there was like this couple of gap as I was trying to figure out in my young 20s what I wanted to do and where to go to school and all that. So I kind of bopped around. But then I settled in Austin, Texas, right up the road from you all in Austin. Y'all are in Kyle. I gravitated that area. My family's from that. My mom's side of the family grew up in Lockhart and Seguin, that whole area. So those are my old stomping grounds. And then when I settled in Austin, went to a few places, and then probably in like 92-ish, 93, I landed with training with Master Kim Geary, who teaches a system called Cheyenne Rue Martial Arts, which is headquartered out of, Houston, Texas, with Grandmaster Kim. And then he has schools all over. So I landed at the Austin school with Master Geary, trained also with Master Rick Fine, Master Mark Wise. And I was there the longest. I got my second degree black belt through them. I was there probably about 14 years. About the last half of that time, about 7 years, I actually was the general manager of the school. So really, committed to helping the school grew out the self-defense program, children's programs, adult programs. And then at a certain point, they changed hands, leadership, and I was kind of starting to crave some new things. So around that time, I guess that was 05, 06, I got into boxing, was working with a coach there, really. I'm like a striker at heart. That's just what I love to do. And then what was it, in about 2010-ish or so, I went to school for grad school at St. Edward's University, and right around the corner from them was Fit and Fearless. Oh yeah, fellow St. Ed's. Awesome, I love it. Beautiful campus. I love it. Yeah. Up on that hill, and the view of the city, or if you're in the city and you look at the hill, it's just a gorgeous campus. So I went there, and at the time, Fit and Fearless as a Krav Maga school was right around the corner. I loved training there. There was a great stress release, just going and wailing on bags. And then at the same time, right around that time, I had broken up from a relationship that actually ended rather violently, had to get a restraining order, that kind of thing. And the physical aspects of what happened in that relationship weren't as scary as how he kind of lost his mind later. And so I really, I had been teaching self-defense for many years prior to that, but now I found myself kind of like in that situation and understanding like what trauma is from the inside. It was a horrible experience, and it definitely shifted my own perspective related to self-defense. That was a domestic violence situation. What I focused on now with Asphalt Anthropology, and we'll get into a little bit more, is more about street safety, street violence. But that was such an amazing turning point. So shout out to the folks at Fit and Fearless for their awesomeness there. And then when I moved to California, I stayed with Improv, I stayed with boxing. I took up some boxing at the Wild Card Gym under Freddie Roach, who that's where Manny Pacquiao, when he's in LA, that's where he trains. So, I've been really lucky to train in a wide range of systems, but with some really amazing top quality people. And then in about 2018, I started judo, which was like the opposite of anything I'd ever trained before. I'm not at heart a grappler. I'm not in my nature. I'm more of a striker. And so I started doing that in 2018, and it just became my challenge to get better. And I talked earlier, it's like, I'd always done sports, always done martial arts. And I just want to give a shout out to anybody who's thinking about starting some kind of training. I am not a natural athlete. I do this stuff because I like it. I still, when I learn a new move, I have to like slowly count it out. 1, 2, 3. And I'm like in my own head trying to remember. So even though this has been a big part of my life journey, it's not something that has come naturally. So I just want to, encourage anybody who might be on the fence to feel like, oh, I'm not a natural athlete. You don't have to be. That's the whole point, right? Is to practice. And then when the pandemic hit and, schools were, not able to meet face to face, I was actually able to work with one of the judo black belts. I have this roof where I park here in the middle of Los Angeles. I'd go up to the roof and work out, whether it was just working on my footwork with my jump rope or doing some tennis ball drills like we would do in boxing, or just fitness. And then Juan, one of our black belts, he would come out and I worked with him a bit. And he was in the film industry, so he was tested regularly. So it was great because we just kind of had that added assurance. But he also had to be careful. So he couldn't do a lot of like close quarters because of his job. If he tested positive, he couldn't work that week. But it was a really interesting time. All the years that I've been going to schools and training with people, that time during COVID where I was up on the roof working out by myself, there's something that really kind of crystallized, like, this is such like my crutch. It's what I do to manage stress. I think in COVID times, what really made me aware of like how much it's my social life, and some of the people that I just love the most are ones that we can sit there and punch each other. Those are my best girlfriends and my best guy friends, is building that. So it was interesting, in thinking about coming on and talking to you and thinking about my history, and just like started with one thing at a certain age and just like that learning and growth. And I've added more recently Kung Fu to my repertoire. It's just very casual. It's been mainly to kind of manage stress. It's an internal style that I'm teaching or learning from Thad Mumford. I'm sorry, not Thad Mumford. That's hilarious. I've been watching MASH. Thad Mumford is a producer on MASH. Different Thad. He will be excited to hear that shout out. But I've been working and doing Kung Fu as more of kind of an internal style of martial arts. I think, where I've been at the judo dojo and Improv, it's very kind of outward facing, but I've been really appreciating the internal stuff. Jesse, is getting that, which has been really good, I think, for managing stress and mood and stuff as we're kind of renegotiating life post-pandemic. So that's kind of my story.
Well, I mean, that's a good pitch to all of our students, like why it's so important to do martial arts. And just to go back at the step, not to derail us too much, but that's one of the greatest things about the martial arts. Anyone can do it. It doesn't matter if you're like a natural athlete or you're more introverted. There's a place for you in the martial arts. If you don't like the sparring, there's the weapons, the forms, the philosophy, the meditation, the breathing exercises. And at our school, we really try to bring everything together. So for me, martial arts is a very large umbrella. we try to start with the self-defense. That's very important to have first, but I like it all, even the demonstration stuff and the, the more transcendental stuff as well.
Yeah, I caught your episode you did about dogma, which I thought was a really interesting conversation. And what really resonated with me is sometimes we get caught up in dogma because we go to one place and we learn one way of doing it. And, for me, I was either driven by, I changed schools or I moved, or sometimes it was like, I just want to learn a new set of skills that I'm not going to get here. And I think for me, I've spent maybe years and years at some places. Otherwise, it's been like maybe minimum of 2 years. And it's like enough time at least to like kind of see what it's about, learn what you get. And so I just really echo what you were saying on the dogma conversation. It was awesome. Really important. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have a similar history to me where you've trained at a lot of different places. And that's actually quite unusual. Most people, they train in one place their whole life. And sometimes I find very high ranked martial artists that are very dogmatic because in order to get high rank, they've just stayed in one organization their whole life. And after a certain point, that's all you can see.
Yeah, exactly. And I will tell you, I mean, it takes a certain level of humility. I mean, I'm still like the slowest progressing green belt in judo. I mean, we've had the pandemic, but even before that, and I wish I'd started judo when I was younger. I'm 51 now, and I was in my late 40s. And it is
power to you.
But judo itself is like to me the hardest skill to learn, and it's really hard on the body. And so I have to really manage recovery time. But the people are, again, it comes back to the people. They're are fantastic. So they keep me encouraged coming back.
Did Matt say your friend? I usually kind of feel around on the floor when we start partnering up to find the softest spot, and then that's where we fall.
It does take that teamwork. Yeah, it does take that teamwork.
Awesome. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Very curious to hear more about how we can use improv to improve our martial arts. The first thing that came to mind when I started thinking about what we were going to ask you today was every young martial artist, once they've been training for a few months, a year, whatever, when they start getting really passionate about it, they start running through endless scenarios of how they're going to defend themselves.
Right.
Every time I go to a diner, I'm thinking, okay, if someone comes to that door, what am I going to do? Where do I need to be seated? And that kind of scenario, all the time running through my head. Maybe not as much anymore because I'm kind of like a little bit older and I've run through a million scenarios. But when I was young in my 20s, I'm just constantly doing that. And I think it would have helped a lot to have role played through a lot of those scenarios. Fortunately, there wasn't really an avenue to do that. It sounded like you did some acting and that may have opened up some doors to learn some of those skills. So that's why it's such a great opportunity to have you on to tell us a little bit about how can we use improv to improve our martial arts.
Yeah. So to kind of back it up, so I was doing, when I was kind of describing my martial arts journey, and then in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's when I got into teaching specifically self-defense. And it wasn't necessarily something that I chose to do or signed up to do, but it was when I was training in Cheyenne Rue, and Grandmaster Kim has this really great principle that he calls Kong, K-O-N-G. And that's the idea of really just giving back and giving what you can. And something has given me, peace, or given me fitness, or whatever it's given me. And then I can give it back to somebody else. And that's how I got into self-defense, because my teachers were like, you're a girl, you like to hit things, we need a woman to do this. So I kind of fell into it quite by accident. But all during that time, I was doing theater, I was doing improv, and this was in Austin. So I worked at places, Zach Scott, Capital City Playhouse, which is really going way back, but also Zach Scott Theater, Vortex, different stages. Even did some stand-up comedy routine at, again, ages ago, something called Paris 25, and that was actually improv on stage. But so the theater and martial arts were kind of my life for that period in my 20s and 30s. And so it was very like a natural fit for me to see what I'm doing in improv, because what it does is it gives you the skills. If you never even just do improv, but you're on stage, things will go wrong. And I've been on stage where things will go wrong and I was inexperienced and I didn't know how to handle it. And so you see that wise older actor step in. We had one actor who he went to get up and the chair got stuck to his pants. And he's like walking across the stage with the chair stuck to his pants. Me, inexperienced over here, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And Jenny, like, who was the experienced actress, she arranged it and made it flow with the scene. It was perfect. And so, I mean, if we're doing that on stage with all these eyes watching us, you know, I think there's a natural correlation because in Asphalt Anthropology, I look at myself more as a reformed self-defense instructor. I don't teach necessarily what we think of as self-defense. I do teach physical skills, but my focus is on particularly women and how we occupy and claim space. And there's a missing in self-defense, which is you're sitting there on the train, minding your own business. And then in self-defense, what I learned is how to like punch somebody and yell no. And that's a great skill. And I think that we should definitely be practicing that. But there's a gap in between of me sitting quietly, minding my own business on the train and then punching and yelling somebody. Like, what do I do in that interim time? So there's the pieces of awareness, understanding red flags, and where the improv piece comes in is exactly what you were saying, Master Olds. There is like no way that you can come up with every scenario. And if you read my blog, I walk down the street and have all kinds of adventures living here in Los Angeles. And never in any of those times was I ever rehearsed one of those in a class, or did I even think of it on my own? Like, it just happened. And so like an example, and I write about it more extensively on the blog, and this was early days of pandemic, and I live in the tourist district in Hollywood, and it was deserted. There was like maybe 2 tourists left. This was right when the shutdowns of COVID happened. And a man who targeted me aggressively, yelling, started coming at me, had no reason to. He didn't know me, I didn't know him. And I evaded that by just slipping in with some tourists and chatting with them. And I got away, right? Like, no way was I going to go hands-on with this guy. I didn't know what he was been living on the streets for quite some time, looked very bedraggled. I don't want to go hands-on in that situation. So, but I never so we do in Asphalt, we talk about, working with other people. How can I use the crowd, whether it's by explicitly asking them or just slipping in, that kind of thing. And so those are the kinds of things that we can't ever really teach. Like, someone can hear that story and think about it now, but I'm more interested in self-defense particularly. It's it's very top down, where I'm going to tell you, here's the skills you need to know. Here's the scenarios that you might try. Here's things you can say. And there's a lot of value in that, and continue to do that. I'm more interested in what psychologists call is a bottom-up approach, which is you can't know what's going to happen. You really aren't going to know. And so really what there is to do is to train your brain to be adaptable, to train your brain to be in the moment and to respond. And so that's where the improv, I mean, these are just ripped straight out of improv classes that we do. It's actually, it's not, you can adapt it for technically to be martial arts, but I don't even think there's value in that. I think, in some of the drills, and I'll share with you some of the ideas in a moment, but really the idea is to give up that you know what you're going to do, because you don't know what the other person's going to do. Yeah, what do you got?
If I could jump in there, I mean, what you're describing reminds me a lot of like the Book of 5 Rings and Musashi's kind of theory of like, you don't need to be trained formally to be a great martial artist. And it also reminds me a lot of like neutral mind. When you first start martial arts, you have 1,000 questions and you try to think really strategically about everything you're doing, because somebody along the way told you it's like a chess match, and it is, but it's a chess match played in a very different way, with relying on natural responses that are developed over years and years of experience and training. And in order to be very good, you have to be flexible and adaptable, and you have to come from a neutral mental state. If you're constantly thinking, okay, well, if he throws a high punch here, I'm going to block it, and I'm going to counter here, you're going to be too late. He's going to throw a roundhouse kick to your body, and you're going to go, wait, no, and then you get hit. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Be kind of more neutral minded, and when you develop that skill, your sparring game goes like way up.
Yeah.
And that sounds exactly what you're talking about with the role play. And it's kind of similar to what Musashi was talking about with his own martial arts style and way of developing his martial arts. So anyway, just want to jump in there and agree with you.
Yeah, totally. And what popped into my head when you talked about the five rings, and forgive me if this story, is this from the five rings or something else, where the master, he's a swordsman and he's on a ferry, and the guy, do you know what I'm talking about?
Sharpens his oar into a sword.
Yeah. Well, it goes on and on how the guy keeps threatening him and he's doing all this stuff. And then finally at the very end, when they get off the boat, I shouldn't even tell him the story if I can't remember the details. I know people out there know this story, but basically he winds up through trickery, takes his sword away and like drowns the guy, right? Who's doing the threatening. And it's like, that's improv, right? Like he didn't know what resources were going to be available to him. He kind of putting off the threat until it was about the timing, right? He was able to find the right time to act. And it wasn't in a way, I need to go back and find this story. It's so embarrassing to tell half of it and not remember the whole thing. But for me, I just remember what I was left with from that story was he didn't know what he was going to do until he had the opportunity, and he sees the opportunity and he sees what was around him, the use of the water, the use of the boat, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so, let's go ahead and jump into some of the drills that I use. And these, I'd always kind of use these on my own, and I'd use them as a teacher. I've observed in just kind of day-to-day self-defense classes, there's always going to be some people who have experienced trauma, so you've got to be sensitive to those folks. And then I started teaching classes at one of the missions on Skid Row here in downtown LA, and the stereotype, at least my preconceived notion, was that these are going to be tough women who are going to ready to kick my ass, excuse my French, really tough women. And those are women that are there, but mostly they're they were maybe brought up in foster care, victims of abuse, just a lifetime of really hard life and being beaten down. And so for me to teach them self-defense was really tricky because there was such high levels of trauma. We couldn't even get past making a fist without like someone, being triggered. And so while I had been teaching some of these drills I'll share with you, it became like required for me to teach them in this environment. And I think, what I'll share with you, even though this was an extreme environment, I've used these in other, less extreme demographic situations with folks. And what we find, especially with martial artists, is 100%, Master Olds, what you were saying is you let go of like, oh, he's going to punch me here, so I'm going to do this, and then I'll follow up with the uppercut. Like that's like, these exercises actually are trying to break up that kind of thinking. Yeah. So the first one, it's called mirror, mirror. And so simply we're mirroring each other's actions. So I really encourage, if there's some trauma in the room or people who are fearful, have zero martial context to this. If you want to add martial context, if it's appropriate for your students, go for it. But you can do this in a completely non-martial context. And so it just looks like two people paired up, mimicking each other. Now, what that looks like day to day or in the moment is if I'm the person who goes first, and Jesse, if you're my partner, sure, and I go first and I just start doing this with my hand, all I do is this, and you repeat, you're mirroring me. And then at some point, Jesse, whenever you find the opening, you're going to add something else with some other gesture. It's a little weird because we're sitting here on Zoom, but anything you want to do, other motion, you add to that. And so then my job is to continue to do that, right? And then when it's my turn, and I get to say when it's my turn, right? I'm looking for the moment. Okay. So maybe I just do this motion now. So now this actually looks like I'm throwing an elbow, right? I'm a little limited in what I can do because I'm sitting, right? But this is what I'm doing. So we do this, and we do this for a few minutes, and we can stop now, Jesse. We do this. He's going to imitate me the whole time now. So we do that for a few moments, then you switch partners, because every partner is going to be different. There's going to be a new vibe. There's going to be a new motion that some people are capable of or not. So we do that back and forth. Again, if you want to add a martial context to that, you certainly can. If you want to kind of keep it more low key, you can do it that way. Then there's the verbal equivalent of that called story, story. These are not complicated names. Mirror, mirror was the motion. Story, story is this one. But it's the idea of reflecting back to you what I'm seeing versus giving you what I want to give you. So this is, in communication, we think of this as active listening, like as opposed to I know what you're saying, but I'm over here in my head thinking what I want to say next and just waiting for you to be quiet, right? Like that's like the worst kind of listening.
Yeah.
So the story is, so if Jesse, if I can borrow you again, we go back and forth and we write a story together. So it starts like this. I could say, I went to the store this morning. And then Jesse, you fill in what happened next at the store.
Sure. I walked in and saw a puddle of water on the ground.
And when I saw the puddle, I couldn't believe it because then this dog came running by. And then Jesse?
And the water, it ran through the water and splashed water all over my brand new cowboy boots.
And then I was like, oh, I have to go get these cowboy boots polished. They're brand new and I'm on my way to a party. And then you go on and on, right? Like you keep that going. And so really what it does, the whole idea is about giving up your idea of what should come next. Here's the story I wanted to tell. Maybe I wanted to tell a story about buying a new donut. I don't know. But, you know, it changed because Jesse entered the puddle into the equation. So then I have to change and adapt. And now the application of this for a self-defense perspective is that, remember I said we're sitting on the train, minding our own business, and then we jump to, I have to yell at somebody and punch them in the face. Well, all that stuff in between is where I'm using the skills that I'm honing and developing in these exercises. So, you know, I mean, I've literally been in that situation. I'm sitting on the train, minding my own business, and people, you know, talk to you, you know, there's ways to shut it down, but then there's like one guy who is persistent in talking to me, and I was able to engage with him in a way that was lighthearted, and then it was my stop and I got off, right? Like as opposed to, I think it really kind of comes down to social skills. We get so used to the idea of stranger danger and being freaked out by, you know, this creeper on the train or whatever. And these exercises, it's really about being with what is. It's not about being what's in your head. It's not about making up these fantasies of what is going on, but about being with what is. And these exercises are an end to the means to that end, I should say. And then the exercises I shared with you, like I said, you know, those are the building blocks. There's much more complex improv drills that you can do. But for the context of martial arts, I would stick with those two. To add more complexity, though, when your folks get really good at that, is to combine them. So for the sake of this conversation, because we're sitting, we're not standing in the same room, and I recommend you do it, you know, in person in the same room. But
Sure.
because we're doing it this way, when I do this just means I'm walking forward, right? Because I can't walk, I'm sitting down right now. So Jesse, if we're gonna do this again, and I'm walking towards you, and I say, I went to the store today, and then it's your job as I'm walking towards you to find that moment where you can step towards me, right? It's like that perfectly timed moment. So you take over the physical motion, you start that, but then you also have to come up with a line of, I went to the store today.
And does this, sorry to hop in, I'm just trying to understand the game better. So I have a theater background as well. And
oh, perfect. Yeah.
From middle school to the end of high school, I was in a show pretty much every year.
Yeah.
And so some of these games are a little familiar, and so I'm always curious to keep building on them.
Yeah.
It does not become a dialogue, it becomes a single story being told, correct? It's not, I went to the store today, oh, that's nice, you know, what was it like?
Great distinction. Yes, we are writing a story together in the same voice. This isn't about Beverly and Jesse being two separate people. We're writing a story together. Yeah, great point. Yeah.
So the motion aspect, if we were standing, we could be moving with each other, and it's as we're adding to the story speaking, then you're playing this kind of dancing reactionary game as well.
Exactly. And so to make it simple, you know, to start out, it would just be like, again, I'm using this gesture as to represent me walking because I'm sitting here, but so I'm walking forward and I'm telling the story, and then you find the moment where you can like catch me and to walk me backwards. But we can also add other physical elements to that, like we did in Mirror Mirror. Like if I want to walk towards you and do this with my arm or this with my head, you can add to that. It adds to the layers of complexity, which I think for martial artists who are a bit more, yeah, what do you got?
Story, and you're doing this
Yes.
I fail. I can really do this thing, you know.
That is tough enough. And that's part of the whole game, right? It's to make it fun. I mean, I've had students who are freaked out by the idea of physical engagement. But then, by playing this, it really just changes the mood. And then they're laughing and giggling. And, when it's appropriate, again, I kind of honed this in a very traumatized population. So you can see I always proceed to the next level with caution. But I think, depending on who your student body is, if there's not that level of trauma, you can certainly move much more quickly to that.
So those are awesome exercises, great ideas.
Yeah, and they really do. They're not. They don't have to be specialized for martial arts, because the principle behind them is what we're all trying to learn as human beings, right? Whether we're an actor or a martial artist, or a mom, managing the subway with her kids, or a business person trying to negotiate a deal. Like, we're always having to adapt. And these are exercises that just really build that memory. And again, just to emphasize, this is about the bottom-up building of skill, because you're never going to know. Like, again, I live in the tourist district of Hollywood, like a block and a half of the Walk of Fame, and it's just a show out here all the time. I have the Citizen app, and it's just, I think that one of the more recent headlines was, woman dressed as the Harley Quinn steals a man's dog. And that's like the kind of like stuff that goes down in my neighborhood. You can't predict that. And who knows, maybe that was a BS headline, because that's how, Citizen kind of rolls. But the idea, I just kind of want to just reiterate, you never know what's going to happen, but that's actually, you can prepare for the unknown. And really, frankly, and this is where I push back a lot against mainstream self-defense, is that it is very top down. It is like, here's your 10 list of things you need to do. And here, let's watch this video of this scary thing happening to this person. And they didn't, and that's like a thing in the industry that drives me nuts. It's like, nobody knows what they would do in that situation. You don't know what the sight, smells, sounds, if somebody's drunk, if somebody, there's so many unknown variables. And that's why I really focus on a bottom-up approach, really cultivating your own capacity to adapt and respond.
So I can see a lot of benefits to this, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what are the benefits to these exercises in your opinion? How is that, building from the bottom up?
Specifically, the exercises are, I didn't quite follow.
Like mirror, like, what is that teaching us? Like, what is the sort of tacit knowledge that we're looking for with this kind of an exercise that's going to help us maybe de-escalate a situation or be confident in a situation? I don't know. What are the benefits, do you think, to that kind of an exercise?
Yeah, so it really forces you, when you're doing that exercise, to be present with that person and to respond to what they're doing. And you're not necessarily looking to change or control their behavior, but you're looking for the opportune time to step in and take over. And so again, we're sitting here on Zoom, it's a little harder, but if you're doing this in person, and Jesse, you and I are moving back and forth, it's like judo, right? It's the same principles in judo. I'm moving my partner around, they're moving my partner around, and I go for the sweep when there's the opening. I don't go for the sweep when they're strong and they're stable. I'm just gonna hurt my leg. You know what I mean? And so really, this is applying the same kind of idea to a more social context. So it's got the physical element of moving back and forth, but it's not necessarily in a martial way. So I'd say the benefits are getting you present to respond, not to what you want, but to what is. And it's also about really letting go of what your expectation of how this should go and how this should be.
Yeah, immediately I thought of something I try to tell all my parents is that these drills would really help develop social skills, because yes, a lot of times people are misunderstood because they don't know what they're doing with their own face. I mean, I sometimes look at a picture of myself and I'm like, I look like I'm real angry, and I always remember like, ooh, I gotta put some happiness in my face, because if you're going around like that, that's the kind of image that you're projecting. And a lot of times, good point, you're not matching what the person is giving you, and you're actually maybe escalating the violence, the situation, more than it needs to be. Not to go too much on a tangent, but sometimes, a lot of times I get parents that come in and they say, I want you to teach my son or daughter how to defend themselves because they're getting picked on at school. Right. And what they basically want is they want me to make their son or daughter into such a badass that no one will mess with them.
Right.
But that's not really how it works. Like you can't really get into this because it would hurt feelings and whatnot.
Right.
And I don't really know the exact situation case for every single kid, so I can't really say it without knowing more. But I'll say that a lot of times kids get picked on because they don't have the good social skills.
Yeah.
In the first place, they get socially isolated and then they get picked on. It's kind of like, like a wolf pack. What is it? The Delta wolf or whatever. Like what's the bottom wolf like always gets picked on.
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's kind of what's happening is this person has become a social outcast, and everyone in society will just automatically pick on them unless they take it upon themselves to not do that. And so that's something that we also teach in the school is not picking on people, even though there's social onus to do so. And then also teaching people that are being picked on to have the good social skills so they can get back on the bandwagon and remake those friends. And a lot of that comes from giving them a chance to be in a community that will accept them no matter how socially awkward they are. And a skill like this, getting back on point, is a really good physical thing that you can do to help you develop those skills. My brother is a psychologist, and his entire family have their own practice, and they always psychoanalyzing me to death. I have a lot of conflict with him because I'm more physical. Like, okay, we can talk about it. That's fine. I figured out my problem like 10 years ago. But we're just milling it about. Like, give me some exercises to develop to solve my problem. Like, I see amazing. Him and I would always argue because I'm like, well, you've had the same patient for 20 years. In my school, I see immediate results in like 6 months. They're flicking me off. They're saying, and then in 6 months, they're like staying attention, saying yes, sir. Their grades are improving. Like, you know what I mean? So like these kind of skills are that physical work that like I love as a martial arts instructor so much. Like actually doing something to solve the problem, not just saying, let's talk about it.
Right. Oh, totally. Yeah. It's funny, in my day job, I work with a lot of psychologists, and that work has really impacted my own work and how I look at things, right? Like the idea of bottom up versus top down has been really paramount. But, to kind of, I'm so there with you. It's like, I've learned and I taught like that whole, yell no and hit that pad as hard as you can, or, elbow, whatever. And there is great value and great benefit, and that needs to be taught because when you're yelling, especially, that you embody what you're doing, you get really good at it. But what's missing, again, if I go back to that illusion of you sitting on the train minding your own business and then having to yell at and punch somebody, there's a whole, and that's what the improv, and that's what Asphalt Anthropology, it really is. It's those kind of city-based skills, or they're skills for anywhere, but I focus on the city because it's such a more dynamic and fluid and a lot more chaos coming at you at once. So for me with Asphalt, when I put together the curriculum for Asphalt, it can't just like work once in a while in an environment where I might, be a target for something. This has to work in a crazy city like LA or Hollywood, where stuff happens every day. You come home and you're just stressed. Well, if you carry that stress with you and you take it back out tomorrow, you're actually going to be worse at mitigating any kind of challenges if you let that stress accumulate. So these are the Asphalt Anthropology approach to personal safety. It's because I hate to say, I'm not going to say the word, but it's just very chaotic, right? It's just a chaotic environment. And if you never have the time to come down, and that's why, coming back to these exercises, these are really important because it's like, it may not be a violent situation. It could be like, what do I do when I missed my train and I don't know when the next one's coming, or maybe I'm a visitor, like I see tourists all the time and they don't know how to navigate it. And so whether it's like a particularly menacing situation, it doesn't have to be that. It could just be life in general. Oh, I missed the train. How do I find out when the next one is? And just being adaptable. So it's those kind of skills.
Yeah, that's the highest gain, I feel like, of the martial arts. The lessons of the martial arts go way beyond the mat, and they teach us about life,
Yes.
I think we all get into the martial arts for, maybe fitness or self-defense or something like that, but then we all kind of like at the higher level take away like those skills. Those are the most important things. at the end of the day, when you're, you know, your 40s or your 50s and you're trying, you know, doing the great kick or the powerful punch is not nearly as important as, you know, having confidence and being able to stay emotionally balanced in a difficult situation. Those things are really, really important. Actually, on that topic, I wanted to kind of ask you a question. So I've done some women's self-defense. I don't consider myself like an expert on teaching women's self-defense, but you know, I'm a martial arts instructor. I've been teaching martial arts for over 20 years. And I've had a lot of opportunities, you know, like, hey, can you teach me a women's self-defense class? And one of the things that I've noticed with working with women is their confidence to defend themselves a lot of times is what is lacking, not their actual ability. You know, you can get like a 5-year-old and give him a broken bottle and he can wreak havoc on somebody who's not paying attention. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you can mess somebody up. It doesn't really matter your physical ability. And honestly, like a fully grown woman is like a 15-year-old boy. And that, even when I was a 50, you can have some scary 15-year-old boys who can, you know, out like a lot of people, you know. I mean, it's definitely a disadvantage, but it's not something that can, it's not insurmountable. Right. But I think what ends up happening is through society, through experiences at the edge, you start to develop this feeling like, I could never do it. To the point that a lot of my girlfriends sometimes have been incredibly violent with me, not even realizing how violent they're being. Like, they'll hit me like way harder than my guy friends. Because my guy friends, they know, like, okay, that's too hard. You hit me like that, man, I'm gonna hit you back really hard. My girlfriends, they just kind of like go in there wailing, they're like way too hard. It's because they don't realize their ability for violence. They don't realize how tough they actually are. And so one of the things that's always been a really key cornerstone with women's self-defense for me is teaching women how to be empowered. I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but how to have like a lot of inner strength and believe in themselves. And one of the things that I do, which kind of reminds me of mirror, mirror, but in a more martial arty way, is I'll, you know, get in the red man suit and I'll let them beat the living snot out of me. It's something that I do, you know, when I take competitors to a tournament. Like, I don't, you know, like, I'll work with them on the side. I don't beat the crap out of them. That would demoralize them. You know what I mean? Right. Like, I let them beat the crap out of me, and they're like, wow, okay, I'm kicking the crap out of Master Old. Maybe I can do well out there. To, you know, and you empower them. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like the mirror, mirror thing that's going on there. A little bit different, but it's in a similar vein. What are exercises that you use to help empower women in that similar way?
That's a great question. So, you know, we talked about the idea of like hitting something hard and yelling, that kind of thing is absolutely one of them. It really does come down to, I mean, if we kind of step back from the improv, which can be a gateway, right? Because you talked about how some women are conditioned to be fearful of this, to not understand it. So I think that the improv, with all the martial aspects stripped out of it, is a great gateway and an introduction to that. But really, it's just training. It's showing them how to, you know, that they can do this. I think one part that I don't think women consider that have that belief is that, you know, if you think about targeting, right? Like, nobody has strong eyeballs that are going to withstand my thumbs gouged in them, right? So I think the part of that is just understanding the curriculum. If I punch a guy in the shoulder, that's just going to make him angry, right? Or just annoy him, right? But it does come back to, when we're teaching self-defense, you know, what is the target? What is the very specific target? Not just a general flailing and punching a non-vital area. But then there's also the aspect of, there's the targeting, but then the timing, which again, the improv will train you for. So maybe I am wrapped up in the situation and I can't move my arms. Well, you know, he can't really do anything to me then either, while he maybe had me wrapped up. So like, the second he like maybe shifts position or that loosens, that's the window of opportunity. So I think really, when it comes down to, you know, teaching women, and I'm very specific the way I'm saying this, because not all women are socialized. A lot of women are, and I think the majority of women are, and a lot of it's biologically driven, that, you know, to not hurt, to not harm. And then there are women who don't interact, who don't engage that way. I don't know that I was ever really that way, and a lifetime of martial arts. So I know I'm talking about this because I've walked into rooms and men will treat me like I'm a fragile flower. And then you just kind of have to, you know, show that women are not a monolith, right? We don't all have the same beliefs and backgrounds and values. But for folks who do have those backgrounds, it's really consistency. But Master Olds, it really, honestly, it has to come from within, from them, right? Like they have to get themselves to class. They have to get themselves to that training floor. And without that willingness, you know, there's really not much you can do. And again, that's why I like some of the improv stuff, is it takes that kind of scary charge out of it as a great intro. And, you know, honestly, not everybody has to do martial arts. I know that, you know, a lot of us martial artists want everyone to do it. Yeah, everyone has to do it. You know what? I mean, life is busy. You have families, you have kids, you have jobs. And if you can't dedicate hours a week to a martial art, but you can have improv skills, that's probably good enough for most situations in life. Like not all of us have to walk around with black belts and, you know, bulletproof, like that's just like not even necessary. And I teach on Skid Row and live in Hollywood. And I'm telling you, like, life is not that scary. We make it out way scarier than it needs to be. So, you know, if you have some of these basic skills, you're going to be fine. Not everybody has to look like, you know, I think that's a downfall of women's self-defense, is we want to reshape women into warriors. And it's like, if you want to be a warrior, but you can still be safe and not be like hard ass warrior as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. This seems like a good time to transition to another question I had. Sounds like you've been working with homeless people on Skid Row. And what is that experience like? That seems very interesting. I worked with the Milwaukee Public Schools for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I have, like, you know, friends who've worked in the inner city and stuff, and they tell me these crazy stories, you know, like they're working with their students and they start taking off their clothes and doing, you know, striptease in the middle of class. And it's like, what the heck? And how do you teach respect and decorum in that kind of a situation? So now I don't know a single person who's worked with homeless people before. So there must be some unique challenges there. How did you even get started doing that? What has that experience been like? What have you learned from that?
Yeah, a lot. It's actually transformed a lot for me. I got into it. There's a gentleman, his name is Officer Dion Joseph, and he is a police officer with LAPD. Look him up. He's a really extraordinary guy. He has this crazy book. Let me see where it is. Oh, here's his book. Okay, Dion, I'm giving a shout out. This is his book. And so he is a cop who has been a cop on Skid Row for over 20 years. And he tells crazy stories in his book, as you can imagine, of being a Black man, LAPD officer on Skid Row. I'm bragging about him. He's the one who said, hey, Beverly, why don't you come do this? I can't remember how we met initially, but he calls me here and there to come teach a class. And he's the one who's like, the women on Skid Row need you. They need this information, because he sees them victimized and traumatized regularly, whether they're actively living on the streets or maybe they do have a roof over their head. But he's worked with some of the most vulnerable women our city has. And, you know, again, I had my preconceived notions of who they are or who they would be, and, you know, tough, and they kick my ass as soon as look at me. And, you know, there's some really tough women there. I'm not going to, you know, discount that at all. But really what surprised me the most, Master Olds and Jesse, is how vulnerable they were, how frightened they were. You know, we have a foster care system that when you age out and no one's in your corner, then you're on your own. Can you imagine being 18 years old and trying to navigate like life? They have nothing. And so a lot of these women, they end up in this particular shelter to help, you know, get them on their feet, that kind of thing. Some come because it's either that or jail. They had a choice, either come do this program or jail. Others, same thing with addiction. So it's definitely working with people who are just vulnerable, and it makes me very sad. It breaks my heart to think about it. And they're very resilient women. And you know, it's not going to be a traditional self-defense class. Like, I just need to get rid of that, right? Like, we're not going to necessarily reach everybody. We're not going to get everybody always to participate. We're not always going to, you know, have someone graduate and go live a great life. I had a friend who worked with troubled youth. That was her whole career. And it's like, sometimes the goal is not to make them like the next CEO of a company and get a great job. It's just so they don't like use a weapon the next time they rob a store. And that was like a very chilling thing for me to learn. It's like we all come at this at different places. And for me, the idea is to give the women skills to protect themselves, also to think through some of the situations they might find themselves in. Is this self-defense or is this a fight, right? Because that is certainly a part of it. And they live in a world that I have a privilege of stepping in and stepping out of. They have to live in that world. So sometimes violence is the answer that they have to participate in if they want to continue to live in peace in their own community. So it really did open my eyes, because I think, you know, self-defense as a whole is geared towards people who are middle to upper class, who can afford to take a class. I know myself and perhaps you, a lot of, you know, studios will offer free classes, will go to places. I don't think that's done enough, because I feel like the people who are most vulnerable won't have the time or the access or the money or the resources to get to you. So I guess it comes back to Grandmaster Kim and his idea of Kong, of giving back. You know, what has been given to me, you know, who can I give it to? And for me, it's they're the most vulnerable populations. So that's why I want to work with them. But then at the same time, it's really forced me to up my game. And like I said, with these classes or the improv exercises, like they're essential now, right? Like they're kind of cool in other classes. Like I can't not use them in this class. And then just one more quick thing about that is it requires me as an instructor to adapt and improvise. There's dynamics that are going on. I think maybe you alluded to, you know, maybe you've got two factions of, you know, this woman here and this woman here, and they're vying to be queen bee, and they've got their minions around them. So as an instructor, I have to notice that. Certainly don't want to pair them up or any of those factions up. So it's really kind of managing those dynamics, understanding what happens, not taking sides at all, but still being of support to anybody who comes to my class to learn and wants to grow.
It's great. Wow. Jesse, you have any thoughts? I mean, we've kept you for almost an hour, so.
I was going to ask,
I have a million things I can keep asking you.
I knew this conversation was going to go whoa, and like open up. We've been so excited about this. What's your timeline looking like? Are we needing to cut off in the next few minutes here?
I do, yeah. I do have a work call in a few minutes, so yeah.
That's what I was thinking. So very briefly, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. What you've already shared. There's so much here to sit with and unpack and work with going forward. I am curious. So many of our students here at the school, we have, you know, it's a family sort of program. We have kids, we have adults, we have people who are a little older as well. For our younger students, the people that are under 18 years old that aren't living in a city like LA, you know, we're south of Austin, but even Austin's a very friendly city. As more people keep moving in, it's getting a little bit more wild. But what specific advice do you have for that younger group of students that ties into this sort of bottom-up approach of being able to be quick on your feet, being able to be aware of these situations, that you would want to share with them, that we can share with them going forward? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the just to kind of underscore it, and then I'll elaborate, which is understand that not everybody in the world thinks like you and has the same values that you have. Mm. And, you know, I think that's important for kids to know, because, you know, as kids, we grow up in our little family unit, and that's how we think the world is. And then we get out and we understand it's not. But kids aren't the only ones who can kind of fall for that trap. And you mentioned Austin and its growth. So there's a story recently from someone who was an older lady in her 60s, lived in one of those fancy new high rises downtown. She's lived in Austin for ages, right? So the city has changed around her. When she chose to move to Austin, it was one way, and now it's different. And in her environment, someone came into her lobby as she was coming back from walking her dog. A person who wasn't supposed to be there, appeared to be experiencing homelessness, didn't appear to be entirely in the right mind. Her response, she turned to them and snapped, "You're not supposed to be in here." Well, that person didn't care, right? Like, if you're going to break rules, I don't care what some random person's saying to me. Right. And so they continued to follow her towards her elevator. And she kept bitching at them. You're not supposed to be in here. Gets on the elevator. This person gets on the elevator. Now she's in an enclosed place with someone she scolded, and this person pulls out a knife. She was able to then assess the situation for what it really was, right? Like coming back to adaptability. She was interacting with him maybe like an employee, maybe a mom, maybe she's used to being listened to. But when someone has different values, and pardon my French, if I'm breaking the rules and I'm supposed to be where I'm not supposed to be, and you tell me, and I'm already like a rule breaker, I don't give a shit what you're gonna say to me. You don't mean anything to me, and I'm gonna shut you up if I need to shut you up. And I think, I mean, that's a very kind of harsh way of saying it, and that's an example of an older person. But I think, you know, when we are out navigating in public spaces, if we act like this is our private space in our home and the rules that apply here in my home do not apply out there, and we need to be aware of that. And yes, exactly, it comes back to that. Can I go outside and live my values while understanding not everybody else does? So that would be my takeaway for young and old, especially in Austin, where things are changing around you. You didn't necessarily maybe choose that, but that's the reality.
I went to a business conference a little while ago, and we were learning a sales strategy, which is basically there are like 5 different color people. There's like blues, there's like yellows, greens. I don't know. I can't remember all the details of it, but basically it's shown to be very effective if you can try to figure out what kind of personality type you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And you try to match their personality with your own personality, to getting a successful sale. And it just reminds me a lot of what you're saying there. Like, sometimes we get so inside of ourselves, we think like we are the right way and the only way. And so the way we act can be very abrasive to other people. And skills like this, can maybe teach us a little bit about how to communicate better and mirror what we're being given, and give that back, so that we can be always having a positive, charismatic interaction with people.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
I don't know if you'd ever want to come out and do a seminar, but I think this would be a really fun seminar to take us through some of these exercises as a school and show us this stuff. So we'll have to be in touch. Yeah,
let's chat about that. I mean, that is one thing I do is, I don't come and interfere with what you teach physically. I think of it more as like, let's put a filter on it. And the filter being, you have to apply this to a dynamic, fluid environment. It doesn't have to be a big city like Los Angeles. It could be a mall, right? It could be, I don't know, it's Barton Creek Mall. I was reading, they're kind of, anyway, a mall. It could be anything. Yeah, it could be a mall. It could be anything where you're just having to navigate other people. And I teach people how to move through that space, how to use that space. And it's none of the military, like, keep your head on a swivel, everybody's out to get you. It's from a much more day-to-day life. Like, I just have to live my life, manage my kids, and think about what that email I have to send my boss and get dinner on the table kind of thing. Yes, so yeah, let's chat about that for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Ms. Baker, it's been a pleasure. Wishing you the best of luck out there in Las Vegas. I'm not Las Vegas, Los Angeles.
Oh, we're just a few hundred more miles over. Yeah, LA.
Feels a little like a similar world, I guess.
The desert. It's the hot desert.
I got Las Vegas on my mind. Someone just went to Las Vegas at my school. And I was thinking,
yeah. Great.
Anyway, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.